Today's conversation brings together a group of nationally recognized leaders whose work has helped shape how schools think about school safety, crisis preparedness, mental health, and emergency response. Joining me today, Dr. Stephen Brock is a school psychologist, professor emeritus, and leading expert in school crisis prevention, intervention, and recovery. His work has helped schools nationwide understand how to prepare for emergencies while protecting student well-being. Dr. Melissa Reeves is a nationally certified school psychologist and one of the nation's foremost experts in school safety, threat assessment, crisis response, and recovery. Her work has focused on helping schools develop comprehensive approaches that prioritize both physical and psychological safety. Mo Canady is executive director of the National Association of School Resource Officers and a longtime advocate for evidence-based school safety practices. Through his leadership, he has helped strengthen partnerships between educators, law enforcement, families, and communities in support of safer schools. Together, and with each of our respective organizations, we recently re-released our joint best practice guidance for school safety and lockdown drills. The updated guidance reflects decades of experience and emerging research on how schools can effectively prepare students and staff for emergencies while ensuring both physical and psychological safety. Steve, Melissa, Mo, thank you so much for joining me today to unpack our latest guidance, all the good stuff. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Well, it's going to be a good one. We were reminiscing a little bit before we got started here today, and we first released this guidance in 2014, I believe, right? Am I right, Steve? The keeper of the dates. And I'm feeling, I got to say, a little bit old about that right now. It's been a journey, and we've come a really long way since those pioneer days. So I'm really excited to talk with listeners about how this topic has evolved, the changes that we've recently come out with, all the good things. But as you know, it's a bit of a tradition here on the Sound Off to put each of our guests on the hot seat for just a moment. Lots of our listeners know you guys as leaders in the field. And if they didn't before, now they just heard that whole bio on each of you, right? But what would surprise them to know about each of you as a person? A fun fact, a secret superpower, a little known truth. I'm going to start with you, if I may, Steve.
Okay. A little known fact. I think one thing people might be surprised to hear is that I enjoy spending a big chunk of my summer backpacking by myself. In the Sierra, particularly the Yosemite National Park area.
Oh, wow.
Which, by the way, is among the reasons why my first grandchild decided I was Grandpa Tree.
Okay, that explains it. That explains it. Well,
I was always out with the trees.
I love it. Take me with you. That's fantastic. And after all these years, I did not know that. So.
Well, there you go.
Thank you for sharing that. I know you're in a whole new light now. How about you, Melissa?
Well, actually kind of going with the outdoor theme, because that's what I was thinking too, which might be why Steve and I work so well together, is, and I'm blessed to live here in Colorado. I love to hike, bike, paddleboard, snow ski, but I'm also a scuba diver. So it is a beautiful world under the water, and you could just get away from everything. So yeah.
It's beautiful unless... Do you want to tell them the rest of the scuba diving story in Australia?
Oh, well, yes, I do have a story where we did have to be rescued from a buoy in the middle of the ocean off the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, because we pretty much did everything you're not supposed to do. But anyway, we were rescued. I don't know if it was the boat or the helicopter that saw us, but we made it back alive with another one of my school psychology colleagues and her husbands. Yeah, so we do have a fun scuba diving story.
Okay, so I'm
thankful to be here.
I'm not scuba dive with you. It's not going to happen.
We will never go without a guide again. Let's just say that. We will always have a guide.
And she gets mad at me for backpacking by myself.
Something about the solitary, though, right? I mean, this is tracking for both of you, but I have to say, I did not know this about either of you. And I know you both pretty well. So, all right, Mo, what do you got?
Well, first of all, is it a shock to all of us that Melissa wouldn't follow the rules on
I know.
something?
I know.
It's just stunning.
Basically, no.
She's the one that's going to get you in trouble if you're not careful.
There are
So
guidelines to consider.
guidelines. They're just guidelines. Um, I, I probably a bit like Steve. Steve and I probably have more in common than we realize, and I do seek solitude, and I love backpacking. I'm with you on that, Steve. But I was a music major in college for my first 2 years, and so I really, when we talk about solitude, it's music for me. I'm very drawn to music. And actually, I kind of see myself, and I don't know if this is just a fantasy or something that could happen one day, but in retirement, perhaps performing again with a jazz band or something along those lines. I'd love that kind of opportunity.
Amazing. So I'm making a bucket list right now with all of you. One day we'll find ourselves retired. We'll be backpacking, scuba diving, and pursuing music. Absolutely. All of these things sound amazing and kind of explain, I think, a little bit about a truth, I think, of all of us that do this work in school safety. There has to be an outlet. There has to be a place where you can go, where you can recharge, or where you can practice some form of self-care and fill your cup. And I'm so grateful to each of you for sharing that, because I think it's part of what makes you so great in this field as leaders, and makes it so that we have fun together. This is tough stuff that we try to tackle, but we're people, we're ordinary people figuring it out together and doing the things that people have to do, right, to do good work. So let's take the folks back, shall we? Let's go back to the beginning. I'm going to take folks back to, really, it was probably 2013 when this little group right here, this little band, I'll call us Mo, got together at a NASP conference in February. So National Association of School Psychologists hosts a really big conference every year that we're often a part of. Same with NASRO. So this little group has had many opportunities to get together at these places, but this was like just a very formative, it's like a core memory for me. Sitting at this dinner table super early in my journey as a school safety advocate and would be a mission leader at the time, and really eager to get to the tough stuff. And the tough question at hand was, what are we going to do about these drills? At the time, it was just on the heels of our tragedy, and there was great momentum for taking drills more seriously, and some of the actions were pretty extreme. And there was just this kind of, I think, moment in time where we all realized there's no chart here for us. There's no map here for this. And people are kind of making it up as they go along. So this group of us who didn't really know each other at the time, just kind of came together, had a dinner, ordered some drinks, and started having some pretty heated debates about how do we do this? How do we come together and at least give people some guidelines, as you say, as Melissa, some place to start with this. So what do you guys remember about that moment in time? We'll start with you, maybe, Mo.
Oh, gosh. A recognition that there were a lot of people coming to the table with a lot of different ideas. I, of course, coming from the law enforcement background, having been an SRO in the late 90s, and specifically on the day that the Columbine massacre occurred, which changed things for us in law enforcement, especially school-based law enforcement, dramatically.
Yeah.
And really that day, I will point to as a big moment of change. And so I go back that far in time to bring us forward to, around 2014 and those conversations that started. And it was, I think you're right. I think debate is the right word to use. Yeah. I think at times heated. I think that hopefully not unprofessional, but heated, certainly. And that comes from the passion.
Yeah.
I mean, when I think about that, no one around that table had anything on their mind other than how do we protect students and staff in situations? What's the best foot forward on that? So I don't, even when we talk about heated debate, I don't think anyone had ill intention. So that's important. And so, yeah, it was, to me, there was no one there no one was there with nefarious intent. Everyone was focused on how do we keep students and staff safe at school. I mean, that was the focal point for everyone. Now, certainly some had ideas that, we might sit around the table and go, oh, there's no way that's going to work. And so again, and that takes a period of time to really flesh out. And I think that from a standpoint of school-based policing, our approach, I hope, is about balance. Because there does have to be and I'll just say it this way, a soft side of a school-based officer that can connect in an informal counseling way, can connect in a mentoring way, but in the same moment, in a flip of a switch, can be one bad and have to deal with a deadly force encounter and be the best tactical officer that their department has to offer. So that wide range, when you think about it, then you begin to see why all of these varying ideas come into play. And then our work has to be about finding the balance of what works from a tactical standpoint, from a mental health standpoint, from an overall child advocacy standpoint.
Yeah. It's really well stated, I think. And I remember sitting around that table. I brought one of our advisors, a school social worker. There's me with the teaching perspective. There's a whole bunch of school psychs, including Melissa and Steve. We had Mo and a couple SROs, and we also had folks that, had training businesses, had some of those like cutting edge, very tactical based, ideas around what the kind of training we should be doing with students looked like. So there was great diversity in terms of perspective, experiences, all those things. And yet there was this core purity, I think, in everyone's hearts, this shared mission of we just got to figure out what is the common ground here. We have to give people some guide rails. So Melissa, you talked about once this just light bulb moment, realizing that how complicated this conversation was going to be, right? I think maybe we all came to that table thinking, I'm just going to come and I'm going to tell them how it needs to be, right? And then I think it kind of dawned on all of us, it's really a bit more nuanced than that.
Yeah. And I do remember, I think I was a little naive going into that, thinking that most people around that table might be more kind of in the middle, right, with that balance. And then finding that there was really some people around that table that they were pretty adamant that you needed to bring that highly sensorial training experience into schools, because if you don't simulate exactly what it's going to be like, people are going to freeze and then they're not going to know what to do. And then you have individuals like Steve and I coming from the psychological perspective saying, oh, heck no. Like, you can't bring a first responder training method into schools with teachers and kids and adolescents. Like, that's traumatizing. But there were some pretty entrenched people, probably for a variety of different reasons around that table. And it did get pretty heated. But I also remember kind of going back to what Mo said is in the end, knowing that we had really good leaders that for the first time were coming together around the table. And after that saying, okay, how are we going to do this? Because we do need to prepare our schools, but we also need to do it in a trauma-informed, developmentally sensitive way. Where can we find that common ground to come together? So yeah, it was a pretty powerful meeting. I remember there was one time, and Steve, I will disclose this, I was sitting right next to Steve, and normally I'm the one that gets a little bit more passionate, and sometimes I don't always have a filter. And I remember there was one moment where I could see Steve just escalate. And I just remember putting my hand on his knee, like, it's going to be okay. Right. Because it did get heated, but it was also some really powerful discussions.
Yeah. Yeah. And nobody left. There were moments where it was like, oh, I
Yeah.
think someone's going to storm off, but no, everybody hung in there and continued to, right? Because it was the first of many, many conversations. And Steve, I think of you as this great mediator. Over the years, I have seen you in multiple working groups that we've been involved in together, and you have this way of consensus building, of really just helping people get to like, all right, you're not all going to be perfectly happy with what we walk away with here today, but we're going to walk away with something, and it really kind of came down to that compromise, I would say, with the first iteration of this guidance that we put out. I wouldn't say that any one of us was like 100% happy with what we were able to put out, but the response was pretty incredible from the field. From, states began adopting the guidelines. People were hungry for some guidelines, some guardrails. So talk a little bit about that and the navigating of that.
Well, I think my concern at the time was unintended consequences.
Oh, yeah.
There was very little empirical data, shall we say, to support the practices that we were already starting to implement.
Yeah.
And by the way, I should call out my good friend and colleague, Dr. Amanda Nickerson, who has done a ton of research in this area and has provided us with some pretty solid data suggesting that the now traditional lockdown drill is effective and a good approach to safety in the schools. But I remember at the time thinking, and this is probably where Melissa's holding me down, is like, we really don't know what's going to happen when we do this.
No.
Is it going to help or is it going to hurt?
Yeah.
And I remember being very anxious. And I remember as a school psychologist having really solid reason to believe that if we engage in these highly sensorial drills, it could do the exact opposite of what everybody at that table wanted, which was to keep our kiddos safe.
I love the shout out to Amanda. And if I could go back in time and change one thing about that table, I wish we'd had her there, because I bet she would have started that research a bit earlier. Here we are now, 12 years later, and we actually do have a significant body of research to refer to. There's been data collection, there have been studies. Amanda has pioneered a lot of that work. So tons to look into. Just look up Dr. Amanda Nickerson. You'll find a trove of really important research that we were lacking at that moment in time, and it was such a challenge to step into putting some kind of guidance and guardrails in place without having that evidence basis. We really had our knowledge as teachers, as social workers, as school resource officers, as school psychologists. Like, what do we know to be true about the developing child brain, about the sacred relationships between the SRO and the student, the teacher and the student, the mental health providers, and so on and so forth. And that was really all we had to go on at the time. So definitely like stepping into the deep end, immediately. But we've updated the guidance numerous times over the years. And I would say, as we've kind of incrementally grown along with the body of research and evidence and even anecdotal evidence that we've collected over the years, one of the central themes throughout every single release is the idea that physical safety and psychological safety are inseparable. I think we, from the get-go, established that, and we've only, dug in a little, deeper with each iteration, I would say. But let's unpack that a little bit. Like, why is that so central to this work, and why is that connection so important? And maybe even let's illustrate, what happens when we get that wrong in schools. To your point, Steve, what are those unintended consequences?
Okay. Well, unintended consequences is that we erroneously generate perceptions among students that the school is a horribly flawed, dangerous institution, which actually couldn't be farther from the truth. Schools are among the safest places for a young person to be. And I know that that rings hollow to people that have experienced some of these horrible mass tragedies, but it is a safe place. And to the extent our drills erroneously convey the opposite message, yeah, that's going to cause problems. We need to balance physical and, as you were just mentioning, Michelle, psychological safety. The research is full of evidence that psychological safety is critical. For example, being connected to adults in a school does all sorts of wonderful things. It makes schools safer. It also increases academic achievement. Schools where a higher percentage.
That's why I signed up to be a teacher, right? I
Yes.
wanted that. I wanted to bring that. Like that's our ultimate goal there.
Yeah, it's part of the core mission of the school is, to create a literate electorate.
Yep.
We want people who are smart, who can read and make good decisions when they go into the voting booth. That said, connectedness is really important in terms of psychological safety, increases academic achievement, makes schools safer. Oh, here's another benefit of psychological safety. And balancing that with these physical safety measures, clear data that schools that have a greater sense of connectedness with adults have lower suicide rates. Clear evidence that it serves a very powerful protective function. So I guess what I'm saying is we need to simultaneously balance the need for physical safety measures like lockdown drills, which is really the focus of our conversation here this morning, with these psychological safety measures.
Melissa, I know the balance between psychological and physical safety is just one of the drums that you've been beating almost since the moment I met you at the start of this mission of safe and sound schools. As you think about that and maybe even like bringing that to the table, back that dinner that we had, what strikes you about the journey to bring everybody together around that idea?
I think one of the challenges, although there has been a lot of improvement in this area, but it is still a challenge in some places, is engaging our school mental health professionals in planning and preparedness on the front end. And I think many times they're completely left out of emergency planning because what do they know about school safety, right? Because, or they're only thought of when a crisis happens. Oh, now we need our mental health professionals. And I think one of the things we've learned over the years is that, a really good emergency operations plan has your physical safety experts and your psychological safety experts, which is that mental health lens. I would also say for our students with functional and access needs, that special education lens on the front end. So not only how do we make sure that within emergency preparedness, we are considering developmental levels, trauma histories, those students that have, certain specific needs, but also how do we do all of this in a way that is not going to be traumatizing? So we have those positive outcomes and we're mitigating some of those unintended consequences. And there's so many places that have integrated mental health on the front end now as part of their safety teams, as part of their emergency operations teams or crisis teams, whatever you call them, that have seen some really positive results because they're making much better informed decisions. But there's still a battle in some places to get them at the table proactively. And really, you need everybody's input from all different perspectives.
Yeah, I think of, when stepping into this space post tragedy and just kind of immersing myself in the work and learning alongside each of you, what I saw was an assembly line. We're going to first this happens and then we hand off to this person and then we hand off to this group and then we hand off to this discipline. Right. And it was very like linear, this idea of how we would, prevent, respond, recover, like this assembly line. And to your point, Melissa, I feel a sense of pride and accomplishment among this field of folks that have been working. It's not a line anymore; it's a round table, where all these people are involved and aware every step through the process. So we're benefiting from the perspective of special educators in prevention, in response, in recovery, and school psychs, and school resource officers, and security personnel, all of these different folks. And really, I would say that's what gave way to what shaped us as an organization, as Safe and Sound Schools, as really, creating this almost DNA helix around the multidisciplinary team and the 6 essential pillars of school safety. So Mo, I think about those pillars, and I think about a lot of the changes that we've made with each release of this guidance, this best practice guidance. And I wonder from your perspective, because you've been such such a consistent force, bringing us back to center in so many ways, and pushing at difficult things. But what's one of the big changes in this 2026 release of the guide that you're most proud of, and why? So obviously we've made changes over the years, but I feel like this is our most significantly changed version of the guidance. What are you most proud of?
I don't know. I think that's a really hard question to answer for me. I'm just being honest about that, because I think there are a variety of things that really come back to almost, I'll say, when I actually began to reckon with, the balance here. And honestly, I'm not intentionally avoiding your question. Honestly, it goes back 24 years for me. And think about this. We've started talking about a period of time from 2014 to now, so a 12-year period. But I have to go back to a 12-year period before 2014, when I was an SRO supervisor, and we had a homicide occur during class change in one of our high schools. One student stabbed another, and we had wound up with a huge crime scene. I hate storytelling, but I think this is important to put some things in context for my own realization. We're still coming out of what I'll call the Columbine era, and still dealing with that. And we talk about unintended consequences. And certainly, I was a part of doing a lot of things that seemed to make sense, but certainly would have led to unintended consequences. But in 2002, when this murder occurred, we had done what I think at the time was a pretty good job of handling drills around lockdowns. And we had different types of lockdowns that we were engaged with at the time. And the thing that I came out of that realizing was that everyone was physically protected on that day. All right. This is still a period of time where I'm new to school-based policing, and I'm very focused on physical security. And so, at the end of that day, when we were finally able to get the crime scene resolved, release students, there was a big team meeting, and our focus was very much on how do we keep the school physically secure tomorrow? Because the decision had already been made to hold school, which I wasn't really sure about. But so I have this focus as the supervisor of the SRO unit, and I'm having this conversation with my team. And I'm like, here's what we've got to do tomorrow. And a little bit like you're talking about, Michelle, some of the linear approach. And that's where we were. We're focused on physical security. How do we keep retaliation from occurring? That kind of thing. Well, to my surprise, and it's not a surprise anymore, the next day where my team and I were most needed was in the space where mental health services were being provided. The mental health team for the school came in, and there was a district mental health team came in, and that's where we were most needed. And that spoke to the relationships we had built with students. Now, to make all that make sense and now move us back forward to where we are now, I think again the overall approach of, especially from my side of the fence of this, in terms of helping security professionals understand that it's way more than about physical security. And so I think that part of this guidance that I've always appreciated, even before the current iteration, is that we're able to look at this from a common sense standpoint. And the common sense approach to me is that we've done fire drills for decades in schools. We've never started a fire or, pretended that there's a fire going on to increase the level of intensity in that. The same would be true with a severe weather drill. We've never waited until there's a tornado warning to do a severe weather drill. And the idea, when you take it and look at it from that standpoint, just from a common sense standpoint, it makes sense then to take a similar approach in whether you're calling it an active assailant drill or a lockdown drill or whatever the title is, to take that common sense approach of we're teaching muscle memory here. We're not trying to scare people. We're trying to help, especially adolescents, build some muscle memory and understand the importance of listening to the adult and whatever the drill is that we're doing. I'd love to say we never did a highly sensorial drill with any students or staff in school, but I would be lying. Now we've learned. We've learned, and as school-based policing has matured and had a better understanding, especially of mental health issues with adolescents, it's helped so much through all the iterations of this guidance.
That's huge. And thank you for just being honest and owning that all of us who do this work, we're coming at it with the very best of intentions, and we're learning, right? We're learning as we go. And that's been a key learning, over the decades. And I think the way we have articulated that in the guide has changed. I mean, I think you read it this time and you're like, okay, it's about the skills, not the sensorial experience. Like, our objective is that people know the steps, the skills, they are confident in those. As you said, they have the muscle memory for that. They're familiar. They don't have to think about it, right? But we don't need to teach people to be scared. That is like an innately human instinct. That's going to happen, right? And it's actually not going to be very helpful. So whatever we can do to keep that brain functioning, thinking, moving is going to help to keep people safer. What would you say, Melissa, as you think about the changes to this latest iteration? What's the one in the 2026 release that you're most proud of?
Actually, I think it's Appendix 5 and Appendix 6. And basically,
start to refer to appendices. Okay.
Yes, appendices. But really, I think that what we added to this one was really an appendix on how do we do this in locations that have significant trauma histories?
Yes.
And then also there's a separate appendix on how do we do this in locations that have actually experienced targeted violence.
Yes.
And I think one of the powerful things to putting those appendices together is that we were very fortunate through the partnerships that we have with the National Mass Violence Center, that they were able to put us in touch with professionals across the country that are helping these school communities recover from targeted violence. So we were able to do a series of listening sessions of just getting on the phone with them, or some of it was through virtual, of just tell us what your experiences have been in doing emergency preparedness after, you've had some of these tragedies, or in communities with significant trauma histories. What are some of the lessons that you've learned? And a lot of them, just like Mo said, oh my gosh, we didn't change anything, and it re-traumatized, and we've learned. Or they gave us very specific guidance on, here's some of the tweaks that you need to make after an incident happens, because we still need to be prepared. We still need to have that emergency preparedness, but you really have to be careful how you do this in communities that have experienced tragedies. So for me, I think that's one of the additions that we did not have before, that I think provides really good guidance. And we were able to integrate information from those that are boots on the ground in those communities right now, helping with the long-term recovery. And that insight was so helpful.
Good call out. I'm really proud of that piece too, and thank you for really spearheading those additions. Just phenomenal additions to the guide this year. How about you, Steve?
Yeah, well, I think I can. It's pretty much echo what Mo and Melissa were saying. For me, what stands out is more of a subjective feeling about being much more confident with this iteration
Yeah, me too.
of the guidelines.
Me too.
With that first document, it's like, we got to put something out there. I remember Melissa saying, Steve, the train has left the station. Those were her exact words, and we can't wait for the literature to catch up with practice. With this iteration, the literature has, by and large, caught up with practice, as emphasized by the fact we're really focusing on the lockdown drill, which has now years of evidence of keeping kids objectively safe. Getting behind that locked classroom door works. And also, getting back to the work of my friend and colleague, Dr. Amanda Nickerson, research from her and her colleagues have documented it produces beneficial results, both in terms of promoting adaptive behavior when we need to lock down, and also not having those unintended consequences that I feared and was worried about all those years ago. And also, I really like that we're really clear and unequivocal about we don't need to start a fire to conduct a fire drill.
Yep.
We don't need to simulate an active threat to conduct a lockdown drill. That's what stands out for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Mo, kudos to you for just knowing so early in the game as somebody whose whole training, it was public safety, law enforcement, and there's a whole lot of stress inoculation, let's just face it, in the kind of training that our public safety professionals participate in. And at the time in 2014, 2013, when we started working on this, that's like where those were really the only drills people had to draw upon, and yet you really had some of that understanding already. You were in very many ways, I think, the bridge to help us, begin moving the needle. But I'm with you, Steve. I feel like I think we all felt really comfortable just saying things very directly at this time around, where we were kind of tiptoeing in the beginning just to get the conversation started.
Could I ask a question? And I feel like we're all kind of sitting around having a cup of coffee or something else. And so, yeah, there you go. Steve, you used a phrase that really catches my attention. And I think those in my profession can appreciate what you're saying. And I would even love it if you could or are willing to expand on it a little bit further. And that is, you said the literature hasn't caught up to the practice. I feel like I understand what that means. I think that there are times when, especially in my field, I will hear, well, we don't have enough data around this. And then I'm like, well, that doesn't mean that there's not still a problem that we have to figure out how to solve. And so, but I would appreciate any further expansion you could provide on that, especially for those in my profession.
Yeah, well, I think it's back in 2013, 2014, when we all started to get together and have a cup of coffee and sit around a table and chat like we are right now. We knew that there were these new emerging practices. I remember a time, this dates myself, I remember a time before lockdown drills.
Yeah.
I remember a time when we started doing lockdown drills and we were going, I was one of those voices.
Yeah.
I was really worried about unintended consequences. And does the benefit of the practice outweigh the downside? And that's what I meant by unintended consequences. I wanted to know how these drills, how active shooter and lockdown drills, how did they affect behavior? What did students actually do when faced with the real thing? Did they result in behavior that kept them safe? But as a school psychologist, I was also interested in evidence on how did this what did this lead to in terms of student perceptions about schools being safe? Again, to the extent kids believe that they're in a safe school, that they don't have to worry about these threats, all sorts of great things happen, including greater academic achievement. So as a school psychologist, working in an institution that's really focused on creating a literate electorate, creating citizens that can make informed decisions and can read and write and do all that good stuff. I wanted to make sure that the drills and their perception of safety didn't harm that in any way. And when I say now we're at a point where I think the literature, it hasn't completely caught up, but I think we're articulating basically, we feel much more confident with this iteration of our guidance than we did initially, because there is now a body of evidence suggesting that lockdown drills, when practiced in an appropriate way, not only result in appropriate behavior when a threat occurs, there's also some evidence that it may actually result in kids feeling safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, there's some equivocation here when you're dealing with, and Melissa was touching on this earlier, when you're dealing with environments where they've experienced a threat, where they've had a dangerous situation come to their school. And, there's some evidence that may increase anxiety, thus the need for the documents that Dr. Reeves was just talking about. But by and large, I'm much more confident in asserting, and doing so in writing, as we've done with our guidance document, these drills keep kids safe and result in them feeling safer. And that's those two things that I think, Mo, allow me to begin to assert, I think the literature has begun to catch up with the practice. I don't think, as an academic, I can never say we know it all.
No.
Because then I'm out of a job. There's always the need for additional study, careful examination, but I feel much more confident today than I did 14 years ago.
Steve, that response gets me really excited about you being at our national conference. And I guess Melissa's come along and that's okay. But
Steve's sidekick.
But no, I do. I'm just kidding. But I do appreciate that response. Thank you. And sorry, Michelle, I didn't mean to hijack anything. But I thought those were really important points, Steve.
Love it.
Yeah, well, and I think too, when we look at, how have the conversations evolved over time, and how do we do this in a way that doesn't increase unnecessary fear and anxiety? I think, going back to 2014, we had ideas, but as Steve mentioned, the research wasn't really there. Now, while we still need more research, we now have a really good body of research led by Dr. Amanda Nickerson, her colleague, Dr. Jackie, and I'm going to probably not say this right.
Thank you. Yes.
But Schildkraut, they have a book on it. And then just right before we published this document, so we were able to integrate all of this, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine put out a huge report where they did a thorough analysis of all of the data out there, limited, but what was out there on active shooter, preparation. And they came out very strongly and said highly sensorial active shooter drills should never be done in schools, particularly if we are mandating people participate, should never be done in schools. And I think we have known that all along, but it was nice to have some bodies of literature really within just the past couple of years that have come out and really supported that work. But again, we still need to prepare our students and staff and our school community. So how do we do that in a developmentally appropriate, trauma-informed way? And that's really what this document is all about. So we've had a lot that has evolved over the years. I think, again, we really knew what needed to happen, I think, from a practice perspective. But it's nice to have some literature and some other bodies saying, we can do this in a helpful way, not a harmful way.
100%. It's not just we think this is the best way to go. Like, we actually can point to some data. We actually have numerous editions of citations this time around. So just as you said, it just felt, Steve, like we're just standing on terra firma here, rather than at the beginning of this like, hey guys, maybe we can agree on these things, where we were just kind of entering uncharted territory at the time. I'll point out one change that we haven't talked about. And I think it's important to folks because a lot of our listeners joining here today use this guidance, have been using this guidance from the moment we published the first version. And now they're going to go looking for it, hopefully, if they didn't already know that we re-released for 2026. And they might be confused because they're not going to find the same title. One of the significant changes this time around is that we retitled it. And I love the new title. I'm super happy with the new title. I'm going to get into that in a minute. But boy, is it hard with any working group to come to consensus on the best title, right? And where this document was first published, where we landed was best practice considerations for armed assailant drills in schools. So super long, right? Because you get a whole bunch of academics together. That's what you're going to get. But also, you can kind of even see in the title that we were trying to thread the needle. We were trying to be specific and yet allow for some space around we're not just talking about the threat of gun violence in schools. There are multiple different forms of violence and safety crises that happen in schools, but we also just really, really needed to address the elephant in the room, the drills. And at the time, they were really being called active shooter drills, which today I'm so happy to say is not really the case. Law enforcement, public safety, folks that are engaged in direct and tactical training are still referring to it appropriately so. But in schools, we're really hearing people, thankfully, moving away from that for all the reasons you'll find in this guide. And really, we're talking about safety drills. We're talking about lockdown drills. That's how we speak to kids. That's what we know to be more developmentally appropriate and in fact, more accurate, right? Because we are preparing for a variety of different types of safety situations in schools. So now when you go search for best practice guidance for school safety and lockdown drills. And then kind of behind the colon to explain what we're talking about, we say preparing for active threats. So we're still kind of casting a wide net as to what active threats can be. We're still really targeting on the threats of violence and their various forms. But we do this time, I think, really lean into, well, what do we know about other kinds of drills, like fire drills, for example, evacuation? What have we learned about best practices and drills overall? And so that, I think, is an important distinction for folks. So be looking under the new title, Best Practice Guidance for School Safety and Lockdown Drills this time around.
Yeah.
So
and with that, or I just want to jump with that, Michelle, I think one of my favorite parts about this updated document is we have a whole vocabulary section, which goes along with what you were saying is, different people use different terminology, refer to things differently. And I love the fact that we basically put in a whole vocabulary glossary section. What do all these different terms mean?
Every teacher is going to want that, that's absolutely one of those things that I'm so glad that we considered and added in there. Like, what are we talking about? We're serving not just the United States, right? We've got schools in Canada. We've got schools across the pond, that are using this guidance. So let's make sure that we all know what we're talking about here. Well, I was going to say, I think we could probably stay together all day, but I know we can't, and neither can our listeners. So hopefully we've piqued everybody's interest enough to get in there and start looking and bring the guide into your schools and communities. You can find it right on the front of our website right now at Safe and Sound Schools. Super easy to download. But what I'd love for each of you to do is share with us, as part of our 60-second sound off that we do to cap off every episode, share with us one thing. There's one thing that everybody takes from this guide. What do you want them to take? What do you want that to be? Can we start with you, Mo?
Well, especially for those in my profession, school-based policing, always when you're moving forward, and schools are going to lean into you on this issue, on any kind of guidance around, active assailant drills, and always make sure that you're leaning in with the best interests of students in mind, and that you're factoring in not only the potential tactical implications of this, but making sure that you're always looking to balance mental health issues. How does this impact students and staff emotionally? And I think when we do that, we're being really smart in our approach. So I love and appreciate this relationship with you all. It's taught us a lot. And I hope that you've learned some things from our side of the fence as well. We're a little bit different deal. And so I think when we can work together collaboratively like this, it leads to the production of great guidance like this.
Love it. Thank you. How about you, Melissa?
Hopefully they see that value of that multidisciplinary team approach, where it really does take admin, school mental health, a safety, security, SROs, law enforcement, including some of our community emergency management folks, making sure that we have representation from our special education, our special educators. So we are considering some of those developmental disabilities and some of those functional and access needs. Just the power of that multidisciplinary approach. Because again, we need to prepare our schools, and we can do it in a way that is going to be helpful and not harmful. And just to put another plug for another appendices in the document, there is a whole appendices on developmentally appropriate training, starting from preschool all the way up through our adolescence, led by Safe and Sound Schools and a lot of the work, Michele, that your organization has done. It is so helpful. So folks, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Take a look at this document, because there's a lot of really good hands-on information as to how to do this the right way with utilizing that team approach.
Steve.
Yeah, I would just suggest that this document provides evidence that this multidisciplinary approach, parents, teachers, counselors, psychologists, school resource officers, has worked. It is working. We have objectively, I'm very proud to be an educator. I'm very proud to be in education, especially when I reflect on the fact that schools are safer today, objectively, measurably safer today than they were 20, 30 years ago. Now, again, don't want to suggest that this is going to reassure those that have experienced horrible acts of violence. And as I've previously shared, I think that this assertion can ring kind of hollow. That said, objectively, if you look at objective measures of school safety, we find that schools are safe, and they're safer today than years past. And I'm just proud to be part of this multidisciplinary effort that I think is another step in the direction of making schools even safer. And I don't think it's something we can ever stop doing.
Wow, this has been such a powerful conversation. I definitely want to come back to this for the next time we reboot and we come back. I can't believe we can make it better, but I know that we will, because as you said, Steve, this work is constantly evolving. That's the whole point of it. We're learning and we're getting better, and our schools are getting safer. This has been the Sound Off with Mo Canady, Melissa Reeves, Steve Brock, and me, Michele Gay from Safe and Sound Schools. Thanks everybody for joining us.